All right, we are recording. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Amy Lundell, and I am the Maryville College Archivist. I have been in this position since its creation in 2018. I'm a third-generation MC alumna. I graduated in 2006, and I am the sixth Maryville College graduate in my family. I received my BA in History with a minor in Music from Maryville, my MA in Public History with emphasis on Archival Management from Middle Tennessee State University, and I have an additional graduate certificate in Digital Curation from the University of Maine. Prior to returning to Maryville College, I worked as a contract archivist with a dozen National Park Service sites. So why this topic? It could be considered a little bit of a downer for homecoming. However, in our current COVID-19 pandemic, I have been inundated with questions from students, faculty, administration, and alumni on how Maryville College has responded to past epidemics. Health affects the daily lives of students, faculty, and staff. So what has Maryville College weathered over the last 201 years? So throughout Maryville College's 2 centuries, there have been many contagious diseases that have swept through the community, affecting students, faculty, and staff. Though we have vaccines for many of these, it is only relatively recently that this is the case. For the first century and a half of college history, these diseases were rightly feared, as they brought not only pain, but disability and even death. Here's a list of the major reoccurring diseases in MC's history: smallpox, meningitis, both viral and bacterial, measles, mumps, influenza, pneumonia, typhoid fever, scarlet fever, chickenpox, and minor illnesses such as the common cold. So as you can see, we have quite the variety of epidemics over the last 200 years. Now that you have an idea about what we faced, let's look at some very specific examples in college history. And we're going to start in the 19th century. Get my mouse on the right side. So in our archival collections, we have the diary of 24-year-old John Maxville Hoffmeister from Hawkins County, Tennessee. In 1848, graduate of Maryville College, Hoffmeister was the eldest of 3 brothers who attended Maryville during the 1840s. In his 1847 diary, he makes note that there's an illness that has high fevers and chills that is spreading through the town in late January and early February. On February 12th, Hoffmeister and his younger brother James attend a group sing at Jonathan Weir's home. 2 days later, on Sunday, February 14th, his younger brother James misses church, and so Hoffmeister visits him and discovers that James is very ill, and he calls the local doctors to attend him. By the 18th, James is worse and has a severe cough and blistering on one side. He is one of such many cases in town, including the lady Hoffmeister himself was courting. Though James has good days and bad days, he takes a turn for the worse a week into his illness. On February 21st, Hoffmeister writes, "Oh, what can I write tonight? Dr. Gillespie says that the probability is against him. Doctors Pride and Porter were called in, and they are unable to render him any assistance. Now I must give him up. Oh, it is a hard trial. I must part with him, never to see him again." February 22nd. A day of deep sorrow has passed away to me. Brother is still alive. His breath is growing very short. He lies generally still struggling for almost every breath. The attending physicians have despaired of his recovery. We are now standing around his dying bed. On February 23rd, James F. Hoffmeister passes away at the age of 22. Quote, "At daylight, brother came to his right mind for a short time. I conversed with him about his future state. He said he was willing to die. He was requesting singing and prayer. Dr. Anderson sung and prayed. He joined in and tried to sing, but his breath was failing too fast. He lingered on until 11:30 a.m. when he breathed his last without a struggle. He was brought here to Mr. McLean's and laid out. Dr. Anderson preached." If you look at the entry above, you will see that it is surrounded with a black border. This is a common indication of mourning and death during that era. The next day, Hoffmeister describes his brother's funeral. "The students accompanied the corpse to the college this morning in a procession. Professor Pope delivered a lecture on the subject of death, and then the solemn company marched to the graveyard where brother was interred. The location of this interment we do not know, but it was likely New Providence Presbyterian Church's cemetery. We will never know what contagious illness James F. Hoffmeister died of, but this diary gives us just a glimpse into the impact of epidemics on the lives of Maryville College students in the mid-19th century. The early winter of 1908 brought two of the worst contagious diseases to Maryville College. Then president of the college, Dr. Samuel Tyndall Wilson, describes the events of that winter in detail in his annual report to the board of directors. Quote, on the 11th of January, a young man, a student, rooming on Indiana Avenue, developed a case of smallpox. 5 other students rooming at that same house were thus exposed. The faculty, working in cooperation with the county and town boards of health, took what precautions seemed best to check the disease and to hold the students together. Vaccination at the expense of the college was provided day after day until most of the students had voluntarily taken advantage of it. Quarantine was enforced. A nurse was secured for the infected student. Food was provided to those in quarantine. A seclusion tent in the college woods was erected and made comfortable for the reconcentrados, while disinfectants were liberally used where needed, and reassuring counsel was dealt out on every side. The results of these measures were gratifying. Only 2 students had the smallpox. Both, making good recovery, resumed their work. Only about 9 were quarantined, and all these re-entered college, while only 4 or 5 left school on account of the appearance of the disease. Still, the experiences were very trying. Especially so was the restlessness and uncertainty as to a stampede. The disease, however, did not invade the dormitories, and finally subsided, even in the private residences where it had appeared. Unfortunately for Maryville College, smallpox was not the only visitor that winter. In February, Cerebra-Spinal Meningitis arrives. Dr. Wilson describes it as follows. On Wednesday night, February 19th, John T. Shelton, a younger son of a widow, Mrs. Georgia R. Shelton, County Superintendent of Public Instruction for Adair County, Kentucky, herself the daughter of a Presbyterian minister, was in attendance upon the revival services as was his custom. In the after service, he had a most satisfactory interview of more than an hour with Professor McClenahan, telling him of his renewed Christian life, faith, and purpose since his entrance last fall, and his special appreciation of the duty and privilege of living a life of constant prayer. The next night, Thursday, the closing of the meeting, he was ill. He grew worse, and his disease proved to be cerebrospinal meningitis, the dread of even the advanced medical science of our times. The gravity of the disease had no effect on the volunteer nurses unless it was to make them more anxious to serve. And noble service they rendered to the last. The last came in the presence of the distressed but resigned mother and brother and the watchers early on Monday morning. And still almost no students left for their home, nor did they even after they learned that the disease had quickly fatal power in the high school, which was our preparatory department. On Friday, February 28th, President Dr. Wilson, thinking the disease at an end in the college, left for New York to meet an engagement of several months standing to speak before the Presbyterian Social Union of New York City. On that same day, however, Archie Duncan Sabin of Johnson City, Tennessee, quote, a sturdy and noble member of the sophomore class and one of John T. Shelton's self-sacrificing nurses, was seized by the same cerebrospinal meningitis. Again, everything that physicians, faculty, and students could do was done, and the victory over the disease seemed gained, so much so that a telegram was sent to the president, who was just ready to start for Maryville, counseling him not to come home. Mr. Sabin did indeed survive the ravages of the disease itself, but his enfeebled system could not overcome the effects of the scourge, and after a steady decline, he died on March 23rd. Dr. Wilson goes on to mention that Miss Dora Hetty Knuckles, a new student in the preparatory department, also suffered a severe attack of the disease and has not yet even recovered from its effects, and that was written in May of 1908. Her eyes may never entirely recover. Thankfully, she did recover, but the loss of sight in one eye ended her academic career. Once these epidemics began to wane, Dr. Wilson describes the situation as follows. These illnesses naturally threw many into a panic, and more than 1/2 of the students left for their homes. Conditions soon improved, however, and with the utmost tact, Dean Waller and the faculty succeeded in bringing back many of the refugees for the term examinations the following week. while others returned for the third term. Owing to this wise and skillful management, the attendance of the third term was held up to 371, only 53 fewer than were enrolled for the corresponding term last year. As you may have seen on the college website advertising this session, you may have seen a copy of this letter. This letter was sent to all students from the faculty of Maryville College, informing them that the danger had passed and they can return to campus. It includes assurances of safety from 2 local doctors, A.M. Gamble and B.D. Bosworth, health officer for Blount County, Dr. J.A. McCulloch, and the chairman of the town of Maryville's Board of Health, Dr. John P. Blankenship. In addition to these 2 major diseases, the college was also hit with smaller epidemics of measles, chickenpox, roseola, and mumps that same winter. The threat of scarlet fever loomed as it ravaged the surrounding community, but thankfully it never made it onto campus. Wilson notes that, quote, all these diseases kept matters at attention, especially since some of these milder diseases resemble so closely the smallpox and scarlet fever in their earlier stages. To the credit of the student body of Maryville College, Dr. Wilson ends his report on health at Maryville College as follows. And still the student body went on about their work and good-humoredly laughed at the strenuous experiences through which they were passing. The deadly epidemics were the straw that broke the camel's back. For many years, Dr. Wilson had been campaigning for the creation of a hospital on campus to improve the health of the student body. The 1908 meningitis outbreak weighed heavily on a major supporter of Maryville College, Mrs. Martha A. Lamar, widow of Thomas Jefferson Lamar, the second founder of Maryville College. She donated $6,000, which is equivalent to $124,000 today, for the building of a hospital on campus. The hospital was to be named in memory of Ralph Max Lamar, the only child of the Lamars, who sadly died of meningitis at the age of 2 in 1880. Construction was completed quickly, and the hospital opened its doors in September of 1909, which makes it the first hospital in Blount County. Sadly, the first patient was Miss Florence McGanigal, a recent graduate turned instructor who passed away after a 3-week battle with typhoid fever on October 2nd, 1909. The Ralph Max Lamar Memorial Hospital was dedicated on May 4th, 1910, in front of a large crowd of students, faculty, staff, and alumni in Voorhees Chapel. In her speech where she officially donated the hospital to the college, Mrs. Lamar describes the impact of the 1908 epidemics in the creation of the hospital and her hopes for the future of the hospital. Quote, we recall with sadness the time 2 years ago when that most terrible and fatal disease, spinal meningitis, invaded Memorial Hall and threatened to become epidemic, and the panic which ensued and came near breaking up the school for the remainder of the year. The fatal disease claimed for its victims 2 of our bright, noble boys, John Shelton and Archie Sabin. Both were sons of widowed mothers. These 2 young men sickened and died in Memorial Hall. There were at that time about 75 students rooming in the same hall. Necessarily, there would be much noise and confusion, although it must be said to the praise and honor of those young men who were rooming there, that at that time they showed an eminent degree of how misfortune, sorrow, and the terrible disasters in life call forth the nobler qualities of man, and bring to light hidden sympathies and undiscovered heroes. For we believe that those young men who at that time, in the hour of danger, stood by their smitten comrades, exposing their own lives to the fatal malady, were heroes, just as truly as those who marched to the forefront on the field of battle. All of these trying scenes and experiences emphasized more strongly than ever the great and imperative need of a hospital for the students of Maryville College. So these were the culminating influences which hastened the erection of Ralph Max Lamar Memorial Hospital. That it is a greatly needed institution has been proven since its opening in September last. Since that time, there have been 33 sick boys and girls taken to hospital, representing 12 different states. Among this number, there was but one death, that of Miss Florence McGonigal, who was the first patient to enter the hospital. We fain could but wish that the portals of this hospital might never have to swing open to admit a sick boy or girl, and that its mission might only be to stand and wait. Were that not a vain and idle wish, for we know that as the years come and go, an increasing number of students will crowd these halls, and sickness and death will surely invade their ranks, and many a fond mother's boy or girl will be smitten down by a disease. But what a comfort to these mothers to know that Maryville College has a place of quiet rest, well equipped with modern appliances and comforts, to which their boys and girls may be sent when overtaken by illness, and there all will be done that is possible to restore them to health and strength. During the first few years of the hospital, there were 2 doctors on staff, Drs. Gamble and Ellis, and a hospital matron, Mrs. Barnhill. In addition for caring for the students in the hospital, or in their rooms if they were too ill to move, the doctors provided free consultations for out-of-town students twice a week and vaccinations whenever necessary. Eventually, smallpox vaccinations would become mandatory. Though health gradually improved on campus with the addition of a hospital, there were still epidemics in the student body, though thankfully there were no deaths. In 1911, a particularly violent epidemic of smallpox attacked 15 students living in Bartlett Hall who were quarantined in 3 tents, 2 in the college woods and 1 in the yard of Willard House. In 1912, 5 cases of smallpox and numerous cases of chickenpox arrived at the same time. For one of the cases of smallpox, a young woman in Baldwin Hall, quote, "A 2-roomed house was run up in a day and a night, located in the field back of the tanks," for her quarantine. This is one of the earliest references we have to a dedicated quarantine building, or pest house as it would become known. All earlier quarantines mention the use of tents instead. In 1913, mumps arrived on campus. Dr. Wilson describes the epidemic as follows. At the beginning of the winter term, an applicant for admission who had been refused admission nevertheless came to Maryville and immediately developed a case of mumps. As soon as she recovered, she was sent back home, but she had certainly made her impression. She left behind her a particularly malignant type of mumps, and from that time to the present week, the students have steadily been coming down with the disease. Sometimes there were so many cases that the hospital could not hold them. One case relapsed into a dangerous fever that almost proved fatal, though the victim, a young man from Florida, is out of the hospital just this week. 1918 brought 2 things to campus, the end of World War I and Spanish flu. Influenza hit the campus hard in the fall of 1918. Dr. Wilson describes, "Disease in the form of influenza attacked the college soon after the opening and raged for a month and has not been entirely absent down to the present. About 250 had it before the holidays and several since then. 125 were in bed at the same time. It took much work to care for them. God was gracious to us, and only one man, Jock Kendall of Berry, Kentucky, died. He was rooming on Court Street with a private family. Most of the teachers had at least 1 attack of the influenza, and some suffered 2 attacks and have not yet entirely recovered their health." Due to the severity of influenza on campus, the town of Maryville enacted a quarantine of the college for 2 weeks in late October 1918. As students and faculty alike were quarantined on campus together, classes continued as usual, but chapel and organized meetings were suspended. With so many ill, the hospital was full to capacity, so the 2nd floor of Carnegie, a floor in Baldwin, and the 3rd floor of Willard House were designated as extended hospital space. Unfortunately, Maryville College had not seen the last of the influenza pandemic. As with many places around the world, it returned the following winter, the winter of 1919 to 1920, with deadly consequences. Wilson describes, "In the winter term, a severe scourge of influenza visited the school. There were perhaps 200 cases, and some of them were very severe. More girls had the disease than last year. The hospital was filled and the dormitories had many sick rooms. There were 2 deaths, one, that of Alice Andes in hospital, and another, that of Georgia Robbins at a home in a relative, both succumbing to pneumonia. In addition, college farmer James Irwin lost 2 youngest of his 4 children, Marvin, age 5, and JT, age 2. The Irwin family lived on campus at the time." Wilson continues, "Almost all the teaching force and employees of the college suffered from illness at some time during the year. When the influenza was at its worst, some classes were reduced to 1/3 their usual size. A considerable number of students lost near relatives by death during the epidemic. The number who for various reasons were forced to give up their school year was very large, amounting probably to 150. The total number of cases was not so large as during the first epidemic a year ago, but the permanent ill results were greater this year than last year. This epidemic would be the last major epidemic until our current COVID-19 pandemic." Besides the creation of a hospital, Maryville College pursued many changes during the early 20th century to improve student health. Beginning in the late 1890s, students themselves began emphasizing physical fitness. Bartlett Hall was originally built as a YMCA with gymnasium. You can still see the gymnasium because it's Isaac's. The upstairs floor is slanted because it was the running track. Included in this push for physical fitness was an emphasis on exercising outdoors. In 1914, Dr. Wilson noted that, quote, outdoor sports have been more patronized than ever, and the beneficial effect of exercise in the open air and sunlight has been very manifest. Also, students participated in a very popular annual field day. Other changes included a modern sewage system being installed in 1905, the creation of a dedicated laundry building other than the original, which was in the basement of Baldwin Hall, and they required vaccinations for current and incoming students, in particular the smallpox vaccine. Following the creation of nearby Blount Memorial Hospital in 1947, the necessity for an infirmary on campus, as it was known by then, gradually reduced, and it was replaced with a small clinic elsewhere on campus in 1975. The building is currently the International House, or I-House as it is commonly known, and functions as the college's Center for International Education and Center for English Language Learning. Though it no longer serves its original purpose, it remains a testament to the trials, tribulations, and achievements of previous generations of the Maryville College community. Maryville College has weathered many epidemics over 2 centuries. COVID-19 is not the first, nor will it be the last. But as earlier generations attest, the college will endure and continue to thrive, doing good on the largest possible scale. Thank you. So now I will open it up for any questions that you may have. They can be on the presentation, they can be on the archives itself, or about college history. You can either unmute yourself and ask, or you can enter that question into the chat feed, and I will do my best to answer those chats. Feel free.
Amy, I have a question.
Sure.
The infirmary, which I guess is just how I've often, read how it was referred. Did people that were not at the college actually seek care there? I feel like I should know this, but I don't.
I think in the early years that was quite possible. The 2 doctors that worked in the infirmary, Doctors Gamble and Ellis, were actually local doctors. They weren't fully employed by the college. They got a little bit from the college, but they were still community doctors. And so I would think that some of the consultations probably were for the community, but the vast majority of it would be for the students. And the emphasis was to have something available, especially for the out-of-town students, because if you were not from here, you didn't have your local doctor. I mean, maybe Dr. Gamble or Dr. Ellis was already your doctor, and so you would just see them in their home at the time, which is where they would practice. But if you were from New York, or you were from New Jersey or China, you did not have a local doctor. And so this provided a means for them to have that kind of health assistance. And they consulted on anything from, I have a flu, I broke my leg, or I'm highly stressed. So it was everything from just illness to everything that could possibly think of, they dealt with.
Okay, I also have one more question.
Okay.
So just in your timeline that you're talking about, and I know some of it just reflects sort of what, diseases and so forth were common, but I know, notice that you've got some kind of mid 19th century, and then kind of, obviously I know the Civil War sort of impacts that, but like the late 1800s, there doesn't seem to be as much. And so I just wondered if that was just, we have less information about the college during that era, or maybe just this was not as big an issue until the early 1900s.
The main reason we don't have as much information is because we don't have the records. So we have quite a few cases of, we have a handful of things from before the Civil War, very small amount, and we don't have a whole lot of records from the end of the war to probably about the 1880s, 1890s. And what records we have are more administrative. They are things like, these are our classes, these are our students. It might be these, these are the various student organizations we have. But even when you look at the handful of student newspapers that we have from that time, they don't really bring it up. And even in cases like, if you're to look, you've got the meningitis in 1908, and you've got the smallpox hitting campus, with the exception of basically an obituary for the students who pass away, there's not really a mention anywhere in anything written by the students at that time. In the MC Monthly, there's just nothing. So we don't have a lot of information from those in-between years. We have tons of information the moment you hit 1901, and that is because that is when Dr. Samuel Tyndall Wilson became college president, and he was a pack rat. He kept everything. I have probably a good 6 filing cabinets full of information that comes from him, his letters and stuff. And I have sitting here, I have this whole folder is entirely the correspondence between him and the college during the meningitis epidemic. So he's up in New England the whole time things going on. He ends up having appendicitis and having to get his appendix out. So half this correspondence is from his own hospital bed going on at the same time. He's got to know what's going on. So he kept all sorts of records. And then, let me lay this over here. He wrote an annual report to the board of directors, and we have those big long reports for years, the entire time that he is president, which is 1901 through 1933. And then it is from that we end up with annual reports to the board of directors now. So it's from his time that we continue doing it. Wilson himself was a Maryville College alum, class of 1878, and then went away for a few years to be a missionary in Mexico, and came back due to ill health, became a Spanish teacher, and eventually worked his way up to the presidency. So we have a few papers from when he was a student, but as he gets closer to the presidency, we get more and more stuff, and then he kept everything. But we're very thankful for it, because he's also the one who went out of his way to gather information. So we did not have really anything prior to the Civil War, because in 1856, Isaac Anderson's home burned, and his house basically was the administrative headquarters for the college. So we lost everything. But Wilson knew, being himself an alum, and his father having been on board of directors, he knew the alumni of the college that were still around, and he would ask them or their children for anything they had on the college at that time. So for example, that's how we got the 1847 diary that I showed, that was sent from an alum. So Wilson gathers all this stuff because he's wanting to be the first college history, which he'll publish in time for the centennial in 1919. So he gathered as much information as he could. So what we have is kind of scattered before his time. But then he was very, very, very thorough on his reporting. Though I will say it's kind of funny. He goes into like a page and a half on the 1908 epidemics in his report. But his report to the synod has one line that basically says something like, generally the health is good on campus, but it was a little stressful this winter. And that's all he says to the synod.
That is too funny. No, thank you.
This is Karita.
Hi, Karita.
Interesting presentation, especially with our suffering through this COVID thing. And but did you have anything on any polio epidemic? There was no problem there at the college?
I have not come across a polio epidemic. We actually have the sign-in books for the hospital in the early years, basically the 20s to the 40s. And I've kind of skimmed through them. And I've seen a lot of the typical things that you would expect to see: flu, meningitis, yes. Mono, that kind of stuff. But I don't remember seeing any polio.
There may not have been enough cases or something.
Yeah, there may not. Yeah, I would think that in a lot of cases, especially in the early years, when students got sick, and even if they didn't know what it was, they often went home if they could. So that's why you have a lot of cases where it's like so-and-so, they died at their home, or they died wherever, or they went home and got better and came back. But they tended to go home for care from their parents and their relations. So it may be maybe some folks who got polio, but it was very, very early, went home. And so it doesn't really show up in our records.
Right.
But I haven't been thorough through those. I mean, they're about that much stuff worth of information, the sign-in books. So I haven't seen a polio yet, to which I'm thankful. I don't want to see a polio one in there. Has everybody seen our digitized stuff that we have online? I don't know if everyone's seen that.
Is it on the archives page?
Let me share a different screen and that will help.
Oh, cool.
If I can get that to go there, I'll just drag it to that screen. That might work better. If I can find my mouse. I have 3 screens, so trying to find my mouse is, here we go. There we go. So this is, if you can see that, this is the library's website. And if you go to archives, you will see that we have general information, our collections, our digitized collections, and then when it's not COVID, how to plan your visit and how to get here, research requests, information, and donation information. And so my contact information is on there. Whoops, don't want to go there. And, but this is what I did over the summer from home during COVID stuff. I went through, and though we have the link right here, which would take you to everything that we have digitized online, it's not the easiest to browse or to find something very specific that you're looking for. So if you look on here, I've got direct links. So to every Chihauian, to the various student newspapers, catalogs, bulletin, monthly, everything that's on that is on archive.org. On our stuff is on here, alumni and published works. And it kind of helps, especially some of the things like the alumni magazines or the bulletin. It's just random issues that we have on there. And so it's kind of hard sometimes to find them in that big mass of things. So this is a lot easier. Like you can go direct to your class on here. I do have notes on here, for example, the Chihauian was through 2013, but we only have through 2009 digitized. So if you're looking for the 2010, it's not on there because these were digitized in 2009. So they didn't have that at the time. So we have all that information there and a lot easier accessible than it was earlier. And there's my contact information, so you can send that there.
Yeah, I'll shoot you an email.
Hey, Amy.
Hey.
Hey, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much. I'm always so impressed with your knowledge of Maryville College history. And I always appreciate your sharing it with me. This is not about your presentation, but just in general, could you share with us what are your top priorities for archives right now? I know you've had a lot of time to think and do during the pandemic, but if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, like, what are you focusing on right now for your department?
The main emphasis that I have right now is most of our collections, being the first professional archivist, most of our stuff is in boxes, but it's not in archival arrangement. It's not archivally processed. It's not, there's been volunteers over the years who've done a great job of putting them at least into archival folders. So Karina, I know you've been one of those, so thank you very, very much. So that's one aspect I don't have to do, but I am going through and processing the collections. And basically what that means is I am making sure that I'm looking at the preservation of them. I'm making sure that everything is organized into its original order, that all the provenance is correct, that we've got all the accession paperwork in, that they are physically together, that the archival hierarchy is developed, and that it's all then cataloged, and I create a finding aid from that. And the finding aids are then what researchers can use to find what they are looking for. So for example, I've just finished a small grouping of Wilson's papers that he had put together on alumni missionaries. So when he did his bullet, which was this bulletin I actually have sitting right here, our Foreign Legion from 1934. This is basically all missionaries educators and government officials internationally that are Maryville College alumni or
Hi.
former students. And he put this together in 1934, but he had been collecting information since about 1916 on this, because I think he started using it for the college history, and then it developed into this bulletin that he published. And it covers alumni from 1873 to, at that time, 1934. But in his research for this, he pulled together all the letters he received from those missionaries, the photographs, the reports, anytime they sent him a publication. We've got some tracts that were printed for the Presbyterian Church in China in there. So we have a lot of different kinds of things like that. So I processed that small collection, and I have that now as a fully processed collection. It's in our cataloging system, which is not yet fully, it won't be fully available till I have more in it online, but I do have the finding aids. And it makes it a whole lot easier when it comes to research. People can request specific things. People can browse a whole lot easier because they know kind of what's there, and it makes the best use of their time when they come to the archives. They can look at that and go, oh, I need to see X, Y, and Z when I come, and I'm going to start there, and then we move from there. Or if they, for example, here in COVID, I have a gentleman from England who actually needed to see stuff in that missionary's collection, which is why I processed it first. And because it's a box, it's a linear foot of material. And so he needed some information on one of our alumni. He is writing a book on her. Her name is Grace Seidenstricker Yockey. You've probably never heard of her, but you have certainly heard of her sister, Pearl S. Buck. The S in Buck is, the S is Seidenstricker. And they were children of Presbyterian missionaries in China. And Grace came here to Maryville and then went back to China as a missionary. And so, and she herself became an author, I believe, of children's books, and published under, not under her own name. I think it's Cornelia something she published under, but he's a professor, and he's comparing the writings of Grace with her sister. That's what he's been doing during COVID, but he needed information. And so I could give him the finding aid. He could look through the finding aid and say, can you scan for me stuff out of the following folders? Because we have a couple of photos of her, and we have some letters from her as well. And so he needed that information for the biographical side of his work. So hopefully that'll be published in the next year or so, because I'm excited. I want to see that.
That's cool.
That is very cool. Oh, I worked at special collections at UT while I was getting my degree, and there's a couple of things from Maryville College in their special collections. You know about those, right? The Harry Harder stuff, some scores. There's a couple albums.
Yeah, there's a few things like that. They actually have an Anderson letter. In their collections, and there's a few other things. They also have, there was a time back in the, I'd have to remember, I think it's the 80s, have to double check my dates on that, where we had a large collection of special collections books that we were unable to take care of. There was no good place to keep them, but we had a connection to UT, and through various means, they were there, which we're very thankful for, because we have quite a big here, but we also know where they are now. So they've got those, but there are some things. There's also some alumni papers, and I think an alum from the 19th Century's Journal is there as well. I've got a list of, I went one day through their whole catalog system, see what's there.
That I worked with is in the David Van Vactor collection. There's some stuff that Harry Harder, some scores that they worked on together, performances they did. And then I found an album. They have an LP stashed away that's not cataloged.
I'm not surprised. Yes, we do have, I think we have close to, if not a complete set of the Maryville College Choir LPs. And one of my volunteers, who's normally here during the school year, not right now due to COVID, but they digitized them for us. So we actually have the digital copies of those, and we have quite a few Harry Harder original scores. I will say that caused a bit of an issue when I needed to scan those for Eric Simpson, our orchestra director for Bicentennial. One of the ones he needed was bigger than our scanner, and we have the largest scanner on campus. So it took some interesting finagling to get I think what we ended up doing was, I think we took it to the art department and they did a book scanner of it, and it still needed to be stitched back together. But the conductor's score is probably a good 3 feet tall. I don't know how you would conduct with that thing. It would fall off the stands. He must have had a table. That's all I can figure when he conducted that.
It's cool.
Was he hard of hearing and he needed things to be really big in order to see?
No, he just wrote big. So, he would have the whole, because his score is all handwritten, and then he had all of his notes on top of that. So
I see.
it's very messy. Thankfully, on some of them we have the clean copy of the conductor's score handwritten and the handwritten annotated copy, because he was quite messy with his annotations in his works. There were a few times that I think Eric was complaining about that when he was looking at them. Like, I can't tell what they're supposed to be playing here, and so he's like, pull up the individual parts, speak, okay, the horns are doing this there. I couldn't tell because he wrote in marker all over this. And
I had another question, but I don't want to be the one asking all the questions. So if someone else
Sure.
has something. Oh, Susie said she's got to do it. May I ask my next question?
Sure.
So just, comparing all of the handwritten stuff and the newspaper and the amount of information that you have, back from last century and even going up until this one, but now being in the digital age with all of the emails and medias and posts and just so much information, because it's the information age. How do you filter that out? How do you decide what to keep? What's your process for that?
It is in process, is what it is. We do not have a, presently, we're working on it. We don't presently have a, basically a digital access management we don't have a DAM system, as it's called, and we don't currently have a way to deal with doing long-term preservation, but I am trying my best to do with what I've got. And so, for example, obviously one of the big things recently has been all of the information about COVID that has gone out since the beginning to now. And so pretty much I have literally on my own personal email, every time we've had an official notice go out for faculty or staff or to students or to the community, I have been saving those both in my email as their original files, and then I have been PDFing them and putting them in a spot on my computer, as well as backing them up to Google Drive, which isn't the best, but at least it's a secondary location. And yeah, that's my digital curation aspect is not quite all there yet, because it's a kind of thing that has to be worked within to a larger system. And I know that there's some talks about how to get some of that working, and we're still trying to figure that out. But COVID kind of put a damper on those conversations while we're trying to deal with COVID. But it involves a lot of abilities to back up preservation copies and have access copies. So we've got the preservation ones that we can keep track of. Basically, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do that to make sure that they're not getting corrupted. And then but we can have access copies that can then be used when people ask for copies of things. And so just basically been keeping all of that. I have screenshot the COVID website like once a month since we've done things just to get that in there. Every time we have anything that goes out digitally, I try to get it. Highland Echo, obviously this semester has been entirely digital. It's been annoying because it's on WordPress and it doesn't PDF well, if you've ever tried to do that with WordPress. But I PDF everything I can, and the stuff that doesn't PDF, I've been screenshotting. And then I will probably for Echo actually print those and add them to our print Echo collection, because we often have a need for that, to have a print copy available. And so I'll probably be doing that with the various things. But it is kind of, it's something that we are trying to come up with ways to best work within the means that we have to deal with the digital material. But it is obviously an issue. At least I know where certain people's files are and where certain people's emails are, and they all know to don't get rid of them kind of thing. It's like, please don't. If it's it's important stuff, but we also need to work on some of that as well. So we're still getting there. I have 201 years of backlog in paper format as well at the time.
It'll keep you busy.
Keep me a little busy.
Yeah, it seems like it would be overwhelming in I said the information age, but I meant the digital age, because there's just on a daily basis so much information to weed through personally, and then you have all the divisions and the departments and the creating and producing so much important stuff. It just seems completely overwhelming to be able to capture that and prioritize that.
Yeah, there are tools in the archives world for capturing websites as they on a steady basis. There are ways that you can do that for Twitter feeds and for Facebook feeds and stuff as well. But generally speaking, we have to have something to preserve that on if we start doing that. So we got to work on that end before we can move forward. Though, as I said, I am doing the old school of PDFing and screenshotting everything I possibly can. That's important, because if nothing else, we can see it.
That's right.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. I got to run. I'm headed to another event too. Creatus, good to see you. See all of you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. We'll see you
Good
later.
to see you.
Great job, Amy. Great job.